This is VOA Africa.
Good evening, I'm Esther Githu-Yuat. It's Thursday, January 9th. This is Africa 54. As the global concern over plastic pollution rises, Africa 54 looks at the situation in Kenya. A look back at 2019's most noteworthy events on the continent. And Francophone countries plan to ditch the CFA franc and form their own currency. We'll discuss the potential impact. Twenty people are recovering Friday from a rocket attack on a military base in northern Mali. 18 of the people wounded on Thursday were United Nations peacekeepers from Chad. 6 of the peacekeepers were seriously wounded, according to a UN spokesman. Mali's Kidal region has been under the control of Tuareg rebels since an uprising in 2012, and tensions have often flared between armed groups and the government. The UN mission in Mali has over 13,000 troops deployed there to contain violence caused by various armed groups, including jihadists linked to the Al-Qaeda and Islamic State terrorist organizations. People living in the Democratic Republic of Congo are suffering from extreme weather conditions. Many residents in Kinshasa are practically living underwater as parts of the nation reels from severe flooding. Some neighborhoods have been underwater for months after the Congo River burst its banks due to heavy rainfall. Historically, when the Congo River would overflow its banks, which happened often, the water never reached Kinshasa's Manzese neighborhood, 500 meters from the river, but now it sits in more than a meter of water. All homes in the Gwele neighborhood, which is close to the river, are now flooded. Hundreds have abandoned their homes rather to seek shelter in church compounds. A South African military plane crash-landed at the Goma airport in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo on Thursday, according to a United Nations spokesman. Although there were reports of smoke rising from the airplane, 2 sources at the airport, speaking on condition of anonymity, said there did not appear to be major damage to the plane. Now, the world has a plastic pollution problem, and countries are looking for creative solutions. Environmentalists say there's no more time for talk. As VOA Arasha Basadi reports, they say it's time for action.
Choking a drain in Nairobi is what environmentalists call public enemy number 1.
Plastic pollution is a big problem. And what causes this majorly is the single-use plastics, including the single-use plastic bottles, the PET.
PET is the chemical acronym for the type of plastic used to make bottles. Kenya recycles only 30% of its single-use bottles. The rest end up in water or landfills.
For my company, we need per month 3,000 tons the bottles. But now only we can get like 700, about 750 tons per month. Not enough that bottles.
To be clear, it's not a shortage of bottles grinding this recycling factory to a halt. It is badly contaminated plastics like these single-use drink bottles that recyclers simply cannot use.
The optimum recycling mode, of course, is to have a bottle-to-bottle plant. Even us in Kenya today, we would love to have or to attract a bottle-to-bottle recycler.
Joyce Kachugi is country manager for Petco Kenya. Major plastic producers formed Petco as the industry's joint effort to self-regulate. Kachugi says an ideal situation is for a manufacturer to recycle its own product.
You need to be able to know where your source raw material is coming from. And one of the challenges we have in Kenya today is we don't have segregation at source. So at the level we are playing at right now, we have a lot of contaminated bottles.
Entrepreneurs say there awaits an opportunity not yet realized. But environmentalists say so long as single-use plastic is the root, single-use plastic is the problem. What
these corporations need to do is to invest in research and development and develop alternatives to plastic materials. For example, we used to have glass bottles here in Kenya, but you realize that since they are making a lot of profits from the plastic bottles, they are not willing to invest in such reusing systems where you have to return a bottle and get back your deposit.
Kenya successfully banned plastic shopping bags in 2017 and so far outlawed plastic bottle use on beaches or in parks. Activists argue that without an outright ban on PET plastics, recycling is just a bandage on a hemorrhaging wound. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News, Washington.
As Africans look ahead in 2020, let's take a moment to review some of the continent's notable events of 2019. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, and Sudan's longtime leader Omar al-Bashir was overthrown. Africa 54's Paul Ndiho has this 2019 review of Africa.
The year started with Felix Tshisekedi being sworn in as the Democratic Republic of Congo's president, marking the country's first ever peaceful handover of power after multiple bitterly disputed elections. Elsewhere, tens of millions of Africans used the ballot box to strengthen the quality of democratic governance. Incumbent presidents Macky Sall of Senegal and Muhammadu Buhari of Nigeria easily won re-election. In South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa was sworn in as president for the first term. And in Malawi, President Peter Mutharika was sworn in for a second term after a contentious election marred by allegations of fraud and vote rigging. In Sudan, a new era is underway. Abdel Fattah al-Burhan is the new chairman of Sudan's recently formed Sovereign Council, after former President Omar al-Bashir was ousted in April 2019. A Sudanese court convicted al-Bashir on corruption charges in December and sentenced him to 2 years in detention in a reform facility. There is still political unrest in South Sudan, but in a dramatic gesture at the Vatican, Pope Francis knelt to kiss the feet of South Sudanese leaders, President Salva Kiir and his former deputy turned opposition leader Riek Machar, urging them to find a peaceful solution to their differences. The death in September of long-time Zimbabwean leader Robert Mugabe marked an end of an era. Mugabe was hailed as an independence war hero, but by the time of his death, he was widely seen as an oppressive ruler whose policies destroyed one of Africa's most prosperous nations. Mugabe was forced out in November 2017 after 37 years at the helm. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed was honored with the Nobel Peace Prize in December at a ceremony in Norway for his peace-making efforts with longtime enemy Eritrea. Since taking power in 2018, Abiy Ahmed has implemented sweeping political reforms that not only won him praise but lifted the lid on long-time repressed tensions between Ethiopia's many ethnic groups. On the economic front, African leaders launched a continental free trade area. The $3.4 trillion economic bloc aims to boost cross-border trade and usher in a new era of economic development. The free trade agreement officially started on May 30th. Rwanda leads the scoreboard on foreign direct investment. Uganda launched its own airline in 2019, while Kenya, one of the more stable economies, joined the club of oil exporters as it shipped its first crude oil export. There were some setbacks on the continent. Xenophobia attacks in South Africa against foreigners are targeted mainly African immigrants. Africa also faced challenges in its health sector in 2019. Efforts to contain the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo continues as the country battles its second worst outbreak after one that claimed over 11,000 lives between 2013 and 2016. In sports, Hajara Mijeje is a Tanzanian woman whose ball juggling skills sparked a viral video that also caught the attention of U.S. President Donald Trump. She is now traveling around Africa, wooing crowds and charging for performances to help her feed her family. South Africa's Springboks won the 2019 Rugby World Cup Championship. This was one of the sports highlights of the year. And finally, Kenyan marathon world record holder Eliud Kipchoge made history in October by becoming the first person to run a marathon in under 2 hours in a controlled event in Vienna's Pareto Park. The 35-year-old completed 26.2 miles in 1 hour, 59 minutes and 40 seconds. Paul Ndiho, VOA News.
U.S. President Donald Trump addressed the nation Wednesday on the heels of Iran firing more than a dozen ballistic missiles at 2 Iraqi air bases that house U.S. troops. Trump's remarks were widely seen as an attempt to de-escalate tensions after a U.S. airstrike killed a top Iranian general. VOA's Patsy Widakuswara has the latest.
In a speech at the White House, President Donald Trump downplayed the missile attacks.
The American people should be extremely grateful and happy. No Americans were harmed in last night's attack by the Iranian regime.
In an apparent move to de-escalate, Trump announced no military retaliation, only new sanctions on Tehran. He called on Western powers to abandon the Iran nuclear deal and work towards a new one.
A deal with Iran that makes the world a safer and more peaceful place. We must also make a deal that allows Iran to thrive and prosper and take advantage of its enormous untapped potential.
Via Twitter after the attacks, Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif said the strikes were proportionate measures in self-defense and that Iran is not seeking war. Outraged by the killing of top Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad last week, the Iraqi parliament voted to expel 5,200 American troops from the country. Trump has warned he will impose sanctions if the U.S. cannot leave Iraq on a very friendly basis. In a tweet, President Hassan Rouhani said that Iran's final answer to the killing of the country's second most powerful figure will be to kick all U.S. forces out of the region. The Iranian missiles that hit 2 Iraqi air bases caused no casualties, which Pentagon officials said may have been deliberate to avoid increasing tensions and may have provided room for Trump to de-escalate.
To the people and leaders of Iran, we want you to have a future, and a great future, one that you deserve, one of prosperity at home and harmony with the nations of the world. The United States is ready to embrace peace with all who seek it.
Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News at the White House.
Meanwhile, Pope Francis is weighing in on the simmering confrontation between the U.S. and Iran. The pontiff on Thursday urged the United States and Iran to avoid escalation and pursue dialogue and self-restraint to avert a wider conflict in the Middle East. The Pope made his appeal, his first direct comment on the crisis, in a yearly speech that is known as his State of the World, addressed to ambassadors accredited to the Vatican. Francis told the diplomats from more than 180 states that the signals coming from the entire Middle East are troubling following the heightening of tensions between Iran and the United States. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, countries in West Africa propose to ditch the CFA franc. We'll be back.
Is about more than just sitting here and talking about women's issues. It's about listening to them
and bringing their opinions to the table and making sure their voices are heard.
Because our lived experiences, our stories, and our voices will help shape the next generation.
I'm Clara Frank, and here's what's trending. Oluwatoyin Onibanjo is shopping for vegetables at a market in Nigeria's commercial capital, Lagos. She runs August Secrets, a company she started in 2016 that develops meals for children. She says she wants to help promote child nutrition on the continent, giving parents ideas on how to prepare fun meals using a variety of ingredients. She takes photos of her meals and posts them on various social media platforms. She also runs a kitchen where she produces packaged meals and cereals for children, which are sold in Nigeria and Ghana, as well as to clients in the UK and the United States. Next up, Impossible Foods has launched a plant-based sausage patty that will be tested in 139 Burger King restaurants later this month, entering a category dominated by rival Beyond Meat. Competition is heating up in the exploding plant-based meat market, with dozens of new products hitting grocery stores and restaurants this year. The global alternative meat market is forecast to be worth $140 billion in the next decade, according to Barclays. Entering China, the world's biggest consumer of pork, is Impossible Foods' biggest priority, and the company is actively looking for partners there. Plant-based imitation pork is also likely to appeal to consumers elsewhere in Asia, where Impossible currently ships to over 450 restaurants. And finally, American performer Cardi B has asked Twitter fans to choose her new Nigerian name after she tweeted early on that she was filing for Nigerian citizenship. Cardi points to escalating tensions between the U.S. and Iran as the reasons for her decision. Her interest in the country she visited in December 2019 threw Twitter users into a frenzy. She asked fans to pick between the more Eastern-like name, Chioma B, or the Muslim-like Khadijat. Recently, Chris Ludacris Bridges, the Atlanta-based rapper, actor, and philanthropist, became a citizen of Gabon. And that's what's trending today.
Hundreds of new restaurants pop up here in Washington every year. But the Immigrant food restaurant that recently opened just one block away from the White House is unique. On top of making a delicious statement, it also makes a political one, serving food inspired by the many immigrant communities that call America home. Mikhailo Komodovsky visited the unusual venue.
Lafayette Square is just steps away from the center of U.S. politics, the White House, in the heart of Washington, D.C. Now a new restaurant called Immigrant Food is making its own political statement by serving food inspired by the many immigrant communities that live in the U.S.
Obviously, the closer we are to the White House, the better it is to talk about a cause.
Peter Schechter, one of the co-owners of Immigrant Food, was born in Italy, and he still remembers how hard it was to adapt to a new country and new food traditions. That's why he decided not to focus on one cuisine, but let his customers choose the food that feels closer to home. Chinese and Peruvian dishes are on the menu, together with Iranian, American, Russian, and Italian ones, among many others. To Schechter, it's as much of a culinary statement as it is a political one.
We believe that people wake up in the morning and say to themselves, I don't recognize this America, and I would like to do something, but they don't know what to do. Well, in this restaurant, we will give them very clear ideas of what to do. We have an engagement menu right next to our food, and they can donate money, they can volunteer their time, they can sign a petition. There's all types of things that they're able to do in order to help immigrants.
The engagement menu has as many options as the food menu. Patrons can get information on how to teach English, visit detention centers, and conduct mock ICE interviews. Volunteers sit right next to those who just popped in to enjoy lunch. Representatives of 5 NGOs are here a few times a week to talk about what they do.
CARE Coalition is very specifically oriented towards working with immigrants who are detained by ICE. So we are responsible for providing education and legal services in all of the ICE detention centers in Virginia, DC, and Maryland.
Customers seem to really enjoy the idea behind the business, both the varied menu and the chance to help those who need it.
It's such a great message. Well, first of all, I've heard the food is great. But beyond that, I think it's such a positive message to be celebrating different foods, different cultures, all the things that make America great.
Having food and bringing all the different food together from the places where people are, I think is super interesting, and it's something people in DC love. And even I work at the World Bank, so my team is super international, right? So coming together here is a great choice.
The restaurant owners hope the idea will contribute to understanding and bonding between people. After all, it should be easier to make balanced policy decisions after a tasty meal. For Mikhaila Komandovsky in Washington, NRI's VOA News.
Eight West African countries say they are ready to ditch the CFA franc this year. CFA is a currency used in 14 West and Central African nations, which is tied to the euro at a fixed exchange rate with a peg guaranteed by the French Treasury. Last July, African leaders launched a continental free trade zone to create a single economic bloc. They also spoke of the creation of the ECO, an African currency that would unite West African nations. Protests are growing against the CFA, which is considered a colonial-era currency, particularly with West Africa's youth. The CFA franc is split into two separate currency zones: the West African Economic and Monetary Union, made up of 8 countries, and the Central African Economic and Monetary Community, comprising 6 nations. The CFA was created in 1945 to help the economic integration among the colonies it administered. But critics say the currency gives France and European Union preferential access to African resources. Now, for more insight into the proposed CFA pullout, I'm joined by Richmond Danzo, a political scientist from Howard University. Richard, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you very much.
Now, first of all, let's look at the economic implications of doing away with the CFA franc.
The economic implication for Francophone African countries is going to be pretty much the same thing, right? Because originally the ECO was meant for Anglophone African countries, which is the countries in West Africa that speaks English, and with Guinea being part of it. And out of nowhere, France engineered to take it away from Anglophone West African country. So Francophone African countries using it now wouldn't really change anything. I think it's more of a symbolic gesture than anything else.
So who would actually have control of the ECO?
One of the reasons France is giving up this is for them to take out their members from the economic board, which is part of the CFA franc. They used to have somebody part of the monetary zone from France who sits on the board. So they are saying they are going to take that person out. So one way or the other, they are giving them some liberty. So it will be administered preferably in Dakar, Senegal. But that is just what France is saying. In reality, it might be a totally different ballgame altogether.
But why would why would the French dictate where the control of ECO should be? The West African countries, 8 of them out of the 14, are the ones who have decided we want to do away with the CFA franc.
Well, for you to understand this, you have to understand the politics behind all this, right? So right from when France decided to grant independence to these Francophone African countries, one of the conditions for giving out independence were for them to keep 50% of their treasuries in their money in French treasury, and also having the CFA franc. So history tells us that countries that decided to go against this policy were alienated. A typical example being Guinea, right? So that is it. And France sees these colonies as an extension of their country, and they benefit from it. So that explains why they want to have monetary control over it.
There have been those issues where most of the West African countries feel like they're still under the control of the former colonial masters. Is this really the reason behind the push to get the CFA franc out and have their own currency?
I think it's a smart political move by France to still maintain hold of their colonies, but at the same time pretending as if giving out power to them, right? Because if it is really in the interest of West African countries to have the ECO, then all 15 member countries should agree to it. But this is the situation where this is just between France and its colonies, alienating the other countries in West Africa, which originally the ECO was meant for.
But Richmond, we've had these proposals years before. What makes the 2020 proposal to pull out of this CFA franc really believable? Is this going to happen, really?
That's why I doubt it, right? And even if it happens, there's not going to be any difference between the CFA franc, the ECO and the CFA franc. It's just going to be pretty much the same thing for the Francophone African country, unless it's joined by the Anglophone countries.
Is there any reason why the Central African countries that use CFA franc are not on board with this?
It's political also for France, because even with the CFA franc, you know that you cannot use Ivorian CFA franc in Central African Republic, right? So this is a means to divide the continent. This is a means to have hold on African countries, and this is a means for them to manipulate us.
Now, very quickly, any lessons learned from Madagascar, Mauritania, and Guinea that already pulled out and have their own currency?
I think they have a bit more autonomy and sovereignty when it comes to monetary issues than countries like Ivory Coast.
What other concerns do investors have that are already within these 8 countries?
Investors feel that France has got a lot of monopoly, and actually France have got the first right to any mineral resources in these countries. So it still pulls investors away, because France has always got the first to dictate whatever happens in these countries. So I don't think it will change anything more. It's merely symbolic.
Right. Richmond, thank you very much for your insight into this. Right, we really appreciate that perspective. We'll get you back when this happens. Richmond Dansel is a political scientist from Howard University here in Washington, D.C. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a good evening.